Hi guys, welcome to today's video. We'll be talking about whether you should buy a Lexus IS 250 or whether you should buy a Lexus IS 350. Now this video relates to both the second generation IS and the third generation Lexus IS as well. However, with the third generation IS, there is also the 200T that replaced the 250 and the 300H, which is their hybrid option. I haven't driven those, so I'm not going to comment too much on that, but today's video is more about the 250 and 350. So I've owned two 250s and I've owned three 350s, and that's where I'm basing my experience on. And this is a third generation IS, and my other ones were second generation ISs. So the first thing I'm going to say is buy a 350, and I'm going to tell you why you should buy a 350 over a 250. And there are some exceptions, and we'll get to that later. But let's start with the first thing, which is performance. Now, the 350 has 100 more horsepower. It's 0 to 100 in 5.5 seconds, whilst the 250 is 0 to 100 in about 7.8, call it 8 seconds. So it's a lot slower. So you're not going to, and it's actually quite a noticeable difference. It's not a tiny little step. It's actually quite, you actually put your foot down and you feel the acceleration. The 250, you put your foot down and it goes faster, but you don't really get that fast feeling. Now, I'm not saying that the 350 is a really crazy fast car. I know it's not some crazy, M3, but it's still pretty quick and pretty fun. And overtaking has no problems. The 250, however, I was quite underwhelmed with the 250 when I first bought one, and I ended up selling it about a month later, and I bought a 350. And that's how I felt it. So performance, there's no reason to buy a 250. Buy a 350.
I also forgot to mention that the 3.5 litre V6 is so much more smoother and more effortless and easier to drive. You really notice the difference in how smooth it is.
The second reasoning is economy. So they're actually both very, very similar in how economical they are. I have found pretty much such a marginal difference between the two in terms of the economy. So the 350 is actually pretty good for a car that does 0 to 100 in 5.5 seconds. It's actually pretty good. The 250 is very uneconomical for a car that does 0 to 100 in 8 seconds. I'd expect a 250, the only pro to buying it would be if it was more efficient, but it's not. You're not going to save any more money in a 250 over a 350. So again, that's a point for buying the 350. The next thing is reliability. Now, the 250 engine, which is a 2.5 litre V6, that has only got direct injection. The 350 has got direct and port injection, and what that means is that you get the economy and you get the performance by being able to switch between direct and port injection and both. But it also means that it cleans the ports as well, so there's no carbon buildup, like the 250, where carbon buildup is one of the common issues. Now, it's not an unreliable engine. Both cars are just solid, bulletproof, Lexus/Toyota engines. It's just that the 350 is a bit more reliable because you don't have as much of the carbon buildup issue as you do with the 350. So that's a reason to buy the 350. The other point I want to make is that there's no real difference in maintenance costs. With many cars, the smaller engine is more cheaper to maintain and look after, and the bigger, faster, more powerful engines are more expensive to maintain. These cars have the same price when it comes to maintenance and servicing. You're not spending any extra money. And again, if anything, the 3.5 litre is a bit more reliable. So you could argue you're spending a little bit less money on things like, getting rid of carbon buildup and that sort of thing. Now, the other consideration is price, and particularly in New Zealand, and I'm sure in many other countries as well, the price difference is pretty small. The 350 is maybe $1,000, maybe $2,000 more expensive than an IS 250. So there's no real reason. It's different if the 350 was, $5,000, $10,000 more expensive. But at least in New Zealand, and if it applies to your country, if the price of those cars are about the same, then I would just go ahead and buy an IS 350. One other advantage to the 350 is that you get larger brakes. You get the larger front brakes with larger, nice big calipers, the 4-piston calipers, and a nice big caliper cover. So if you paint it, put a decal on it, it looks like an OEM, like a really nice OEM big front brake. The 250 has a smaller 2-piston front brake, and it looks like just every other standard car out there with just front brakes. So that's another pro to the 350. So obviously the answer is you should buy an IS 350, but there are some exceptions to that rule. And the first one is you might not have that, you might not be able to buy a 350 in the region which you live in. It might not be available, they might not sell it there. I know some countries only sold the IS 250. So obviously you've got no other option. The second reason would be that, again, if for some reason you find an amazing deal somewhere, if for some reason there's an IS 250 that's just well below market value and you can afford it, and the 350s are generally way out of your budget, if there's an amazing deal, that would be an exception to that rule. Then you can buy an IS 250. Another reason could be, say, tax. I know that in some countries with emissions and all that, the 350 being a larger engine, tax, insurance, those kind of costs, they might be a bit higher. And so for that reason, it might just, become out of your budget. So then you have to buy an IS 250. But other than that, there's no real other reason to buy an IS 250. They're just not good at anything in particular, really. So hence, buy an IS 350. So I hope that this video was helpful for you. I hope it showed you the reasons why you should buy an IS 350 unless there's a good reason or exception to that rule. And please subscribe to the channel and like the video, and you'll find more good Lexus and car review content.